He came to fix her outlet, an ordinary task in an old house. But when she asked, "Do you ever say no?" the silence that followed changed everything, leaving an unspoken answer hanging in the air that neither of them would ever forget. "I was fixing her outlet." Then she asked, "Do you ever say no?" The drone had been a constant companion in Alara Finch's elegant but increasingly lonely home on Cypress Bend Lane, a high-pitched, almost invisible whine emanating from the old electrical outlet by the fireplace in her sprawling living room. It was the kind of insidious, persistent sound that burrowed deep into the mind, chipping away at peace, a tangible manifestation of the unaddressed decay that seemed to permeate the very foundations of her life since Arthur's passing. She had tried everything a solitary woman with limited handyman skills could manage, jiggling cords, reseating plugs with a frustrated sigh, even a few sharp words delivered in hushed tones to the inanimate object as if scolding a recalcitrant child. Nothing worked. The decision to finally call Arcadian Fix-It, a small local service her neighbor, an elderly, perpetually cheerful man named Silas Croft, had recommended, felt less like a practical solution and more like a surrender to the inevitable. She just hadn't expected the particular kind of inevitability that arrived at her doorstep. When the doorbell chimed, a mellow, old-fashioned sound echoing through the quiet house at precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, Ilara, a woman whose beauty was now subtly tempered by the weight of unspoken grief and the fine lines around her intelligent gray eyes, pulled open the heavy oak door. There, on her sun-dappled porch, framed by the wild tendrils of her neglected jasmine vine, stood a young man who seemed barely out of his teens. He was tall, his frame lean but deceptively strong, clad in practical work trousers that managed to emphasize the length of his legs, and a faded denim work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with fine, light hair. His face was earnest, almost deferential, and his eyes, a clear hazel, held a surprising depth. "Good afternoon, Miss Finch," he said, his voice a low, hesitant murmur that was almost swallowed by the lazy hum of the summer afternoon. His name, he added, almost as an afterthought, was Corbin Thorne. He held a well-worn leather tool bag, its contents rattling softly, a sound that, even now, sent a peculiar shiver through Ilara. Ilara found herself momentarily speechless. She'd envisioned an older man, perhaps with calloused hands and a patronizing air, a kind of familiar fixture of her late husband's former life. Not this quiet, almost shy young man who seemed to carry a burden of unspoken responsibility far beyond his apparent years. "Yes, yes, please come in," she managed, stepping back and gesturing with a slightly trembling hand towards the vast expanse of her living room. The house, a testament to early 20th century craftsmanship, still held much of its original grandeur, but also its charming, if frustrating, eccentricities, the subtle lean of the floorboards, the whisper of drafts from ancient window frames, and, evidently, a deeply personal relationship with its electrical wiring. Corbin stepped inside, his movements fluid and unhurried. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the faded grandeur of the antique furniture, the towering, overstuffed bookshelves, and the silent, untouched grand piano in the far corner. His eyes paused, just for a breath, on a silver-framed photograph on a small, ornate side table. A younger Ilara, her face alight with laughter, nestled close to a man whose kind smile was a mirror of her own, now only a memory. A flicker of something, perhaps recognition or a shared understanding of absence, passed through his eyes before they dropped almost reverently to the task at hand. It was a fleeting moment, but to Ilara it felt like an acknowledgment, a subtle nod to the empty space in her life. It's right here, near the fireplace, Alara explained, her voice softening involuntarily as she led him across the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. It's been making this mosquito-like whine. Persistent. Just always there. Corbin nodded, already kneeling by the offending outlet. He reached into his bag, his fingers nimble as they extracted a small, non-contact voltage tester. The moment he pressed it against the plate, it pulsed with an angry red glow and emitted a rapid, insistent series of beeps, confirming Alara's complaint with an almost accusatory tone. With practiced ease, he unscrewed the faceplate, exposing the intricate, almost chaotic tangle of wires behind it. Alara found herself watching him, a strange cocktail of curiosity and an unexpected, almost unnerving sense of vulnerability washing over her. She rarely allowed strangers into the intimate spaces of her home anymore, and the quiet, focused intensity of this young man's presence was undeniably, disturbingly different. He worked with a profound concentration, his brow furrowed in a slight frown, and she couldn't help but observe the subtle play of muscles beneath the taut skin of his forearms as he deftly manipulated the wiring. There was an understated strength about him, a competence that felt both alien and strangely comforting. "It looks like a loose connection," Corbin murmured, his voice low, more to himself than to her, as he meticulously tested each wire with the tester. The beeps grew calmer now, less agitated. "And the insulation on this neutral wire is a bit frayed. Probably just old age, honestly. I can replace the entire outlet if you'd prefer, just to be on the safe side." "It's a standard grounded outlet, nothing too complicated, shouldn't take long at all." "Whatever you think is best," Alara found herself saying, her voice a little too quiet, a little too soft. She moved a step closer, drawn by the quiet hum of his work, the faint, almost metallic scent of old wiring mixed with something subtly clean, like fresh wood shavings. "It's an old house. Things are always needing attention." A small, melancholic smile touched her lips, a wistful acknowledgment of the perpetual state of her own life. He glanced up, his eyes briefly meeting hers, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher passing between them. "They built them to last back then, though," he offered, a hint of unexpected warmth in his tone. "They just need a bit of care, a little understanding." The tentative conversation faded as he returned to his task. The only sounds in the grand living room were the faint clinking of his tools, the gentle rasp of sandpaper as he carefully prepared the new wires, and the occasional, almost imperceptible sigh from the ancient house itself. Alara found herself studying him, her gaze lingering. His dark auburn hair fell slightly over his forehead, and he would occasionally brush it away with the back of his hand, a simple, unconscious gesture that spoke of focused effort. There was a quiet strength about him, a grounded competence that was almost disarming. It had been an immeasurable amount of time since she'd felt that sense of quiet, unobtrusive capability in her home. Not since Arthur. Not truly. She moved to the plush armchair, perching precariously on its edge, feigning an interest in the faded spine of an old book, but her gaze, like an insistent moth to a flame, kept drifting back to Corbin. He seemed utterly absorbed, his entire world narrowed to the small, intricate electrical box in front of him. He carefully removed the old, faulty outlet, then, with a small, sharp utility knife, meticulously stripped the new wires. He was methodical, almost artistic in his precision, a young man utterly at peace with his craft. "Do you do this often?" she asked, the question breaking the soft silence, her voice a little louder than she'd intended. startling herself more than him. He looked up, a slight jolt of surprise in his hazel eyes. "Electrical work? Yes, ma'am. My dad started Arcadian Fix-It years ago. I've been helping him since I was a kid, really. Went to vocational school for it right after high school. He passed away a few years back, so now it's just me running things." His voice, though low, was tinged with a faint, unvarnished sadness, a shadow passing over his youthful features. It was a grief she recognized, a profound echo of her own. "Oh, I'm so very sorry to hear that, Corbin," Alara said, the words slipping out automatically, her own unspoken loss a poignant counterpoint to his. She understood the weight of absence. It was a language she knew too intimately. He shrugged, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement of his broad shoulders. "It's all right. He taught me everything worth knowing. He was a good man." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming the truth of his words to himself, solidifying the memory. "Anyway, this new outlet will be much safer, better grounding, no more whining." As he continued his work, a peculiar, almost palpable atmosphere settled between them. It wasn't overt flirtation, not in the obvious superficial sense. It was something deeper, more elemental. A silent recognition, a shared space of quiet, profound understanding that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the mundane task. The air in the room, usually heavy with the lingering scent of old paper, dust, and time, seemed to vibrate with something else entirely, something unspoken, a current far more powerful than the electricity he was taming. Ilara felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic attraction to the quiet, focused energy of his presence. It was the kind of feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a dormant part of her, a part she thought had withered and died, slowly, tentatively, beginning to stir. He finished connecting the intricate web of wires, carefully screwing the new outlet firmly into place. He then replaced the faceplate, pressing it with a deliberate motion until it clicked softly into position. He produced a small, utilitarian lamp from his bag, plugged it in, and its light flared brightly, a clean, steady glow without any accompanying, irritating whine. A small victory. "There," Corbin said, straightening up with a slow stretch, wiping his hands on a clean, well-worn rag. "Should be good as new. Better, even." He offered a small, hesitant smile, a genuine warmth radiating from it, reaching into the quiet corners of the room. Ilara rose from the armchair, approaching the now silent outlet, almost reverently touching the smooth, cool plastic of the new faceplate. The absence of that maddening hum was a profound relief, a quiet triumph in a life often riddled with small, persistent frustrations that accumulated slowly but surely into larger burdens. "Thank you, Corbin," she said, looking up at him. He was closer now, standing just a few feet away, and she could see the subtle flecks of gold in his clear hazel eyes, the faint, almost imperceptible stubble on his strong jawline. He was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, unassuming way, the kind of handsomeness that didn't demand attention, but quietly earned it. "You've no idea how much that noise was. It was really getting to me." He nodded, a slight, almost boyish blush rising on his cheeks. "Glad I could help, Miss Finch." He started to pack his tools, the familiar clinking sounds resuming, the practical rhythm of his departure. As he reached for his voltage tester, about to place it back in his bag, his hand brushed against hers. Ilara had instinctively reached out, almost unconsciously, to touch the now silent lamp. It was a fleeting contact, barely there, a whisper of skin against skin, but it sent a sharp jolt, a static charge, through Ilara, more potent than any electrical current. Her breath hitched, a small, involuntary gasp. Corbin quickly pulled his hand back as if burned, a deeper flush creeping up his neck and across his cheekbones. Their eyes met, and in that brief, suspended moment, the air thickened, charged with an undeniable, unacknowledged current. It was more than just awkwardness, it was a sudden, profound awareness, a recognition of something dormant stirring within both of them. A question hung in the air, unspoken, vibrating with an almost painful intensity, electric and raw. The phantom warmth of Corbin's accidental touch lingered on Ilara's skin, a subtle, persistent sensation that defied logical explanation. He finished packing his tools, the silence between them now profound, weighted with the immense gravity of the unspoken. He offered her the crisp invoice, his hand steady, but his gaze still meticulously avoided hers, fixed instead on the gleaming surface of the polished hardwood floor. He was a professional, retreating into the safe, familiar boundaries of his trade. That will be $85, ma'am," he murmured, his voice softer than before, almost a whisper, as if acknowledging the delicate nature of the atmosphere, almost apologetic for breaking the spell. Ilara took the paper, her fingers brushing his again, this time, intentionally, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. She felt him flinch, a barely perceptible tremor that spoke volumes. "Right," she said, trying to steady her voice to make it sound nonchalant. "Let me just get my purse." She turned and walked towards the small sunlit study, its entrance just off the living room, a space she rarely occupied now, too filled with the echoes of a past life. The desk within was cluttered with bills, old letters she couldn't bear to throw away, and the untouched remnants of a life that felt increasingly solitary, increasingly empty. She opened her purse, her mind racing, scrambling for a reason, any reason at all, to keep him there, to prolong this strange, potent stillness that had settled around them. "Actually," she called out, her voice slightly amplified by the archway as he stood by the heavy oak front door, his hand hovering over the cold brass knob, poised for departure. Could you possibly take a look at something else while you're here? In the kitchen. The faucet's been dripping and I haven't had the time to get to it. Or the energy." The last few words were almost lost in a sigh. Corbin hesitated, his gaze finally lifting from the floor to meet hers across the distance of the living room. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, certainly, but also a deeper, more hesitant curiosity. He was clearly trying to maintain his professional demeanor, but the subtle shift in his posture, the slight tilt of his head, betrayed a deeper consideration. "The faucet," he repeated, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. "I specialize in electrical work mostly, Ms. Finch, as you know. Plumbing isn't my primary area, but I can certainly take a look, if it's something straightforward, of course." "It would be a tremendous help, Corbin," Ilara pressed, her voice gaining a surprising new urgency, a faint desperation she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm utterly hopeless with these kinds of things, truly. And it's a bit of a nuisance, you see, especially late at night when everything else is quiet. It amplifies everything." The last part was spoken almost as an afterthought, a quiet, almost painful admission of her pervasive loneliness, the way the smallest sound could echo in the vast emptiness of her home. He seemed to weigh her words, a silent internal debate playing out on his face. He glanced at his wrist, though he wasn't wearing a watch, a gesture of someone trying to gauge the passage of time. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. A flicker of resolution. "All right, Miss Finch, lead the way." "But I can't promise anything if it's complicated." Alara felt a small, triumphant thrill surge through her, a wave of relief that surprised her with its intensity. She led him through the grand, silent dining room, where antique furniture stood shrouded in white dust sheets like ghostly sentinels, into the large, airy kitchen. The kitchen, unlike the rest of the house, felt more lived in, more immediate, with its well-used wooden island and a cheerful collection of mismatched mugs drying on a rack by the sun-drenched window. The persistent drip from the kitchen faucet was a rhythmic, almost meditative plink, plink, plink against the pristine porcelain sink, a tiny, insistent pulse in the quiet room. Corbin set his tool bag down near the sink, the soft thud resonating in the quiet, and knelt again, his back partially turned to her, as he meticulously examined the base of the faucet. Ilara leaned against the cool, smooth granite countertop, her gaze fixed on his broad shoulders, the subtle ripple of muscle beneath his shirt. The kitchen, with its warm, natural light filtering through the sheer curtains, felt different from the formal living room, less imposing, more intimate, a space for shared moments. "It looks like the O-rings are simply worn," he explained, his voice muffled as he peered into the dark recesses underneath the sink. "It's a pretty common problem with older faucets like this one. I don't usually carry plumbing supplies, as I mentioned, but I might have some spare O-rings in the truck that could work as a temporary fix. Otherwise, it'll be a quick trip to Wallace & Sons on Meadowbrook Drive. It's not far, just a few minutes." "Oh," Ilara said, a faint, almost childlike disappointment surfacing in her tone. The thought of him leaving, even for a short while, filled her with an unexpected, sharp pang of regret. He pulled himself out from under the sink, his dark hair a little disheveled from the effort. He looked at her, his hazel eyes earnest. "I can run to the hardware store for you, if you'd like. It's really no trouble. I'll just add the cost of the parts to the invoice, of course." Alara considered this, a silent battle playing out within her. The thought of him being gone, even for a short errand, left a hollow ache. "No, no, that's quite all right, Corbin," she said quickly, perhaps too quickly, her voice almost breathless. "I wouldn't want to put you out. Besides, it's just a drip. It can wait. You've done quite enough already with the outlet. More than enough." She walked over to the sink, reaching out and turning the handle of the faucet. The drip continued, a tiny, insistent pulse, a defiant reminder of imperfection. She stood beside him now, closer than strictly necessary, their shoulders almost touching. The faint, clean scent of his skin, a subtle mix of sweat, something metallic, and a hint of fresh air drifted to her. She found herself acutely, almost painfully, aware of his presence, the way his shoulders broadened beneath the worn denim shirt, the subtle rise and fall of his chest with each quiet breath he took. A current, different from the electrical one, flowed between them, invisible, yet undeniably potent. "It's really no trouble, Miss Finch," Corbin insisted again, his gaze still fixed on the dripping faucet, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere around them, or perhaps subtly choosing to ignore it. "I'm here already." Alara shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "No, honestly, it's fine. Thank you, though." She paused, the silence stretching, filling with unspoken possibilities. Then, on an impulse she hadn't anticipated, a quiet desperation that surprised even herself, she found herself saying, Would you care for a glass of iced tea, Corbin? It's rather warm today, and you've been working hard." The words felt foreign on her tongue, an invitation she hadn't extended to anyone, a true guest in a long, long time. Not since Arthur. Corbin looked at her, his hazel eyes widening slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise evident in their depths. He seemed genuinely taken aback, as if he hadn't expected such an offering. "Oh, that's very kind of you, Miss Finch," he stammered slightly, his voice a little more uncertain than before. "But I really should be going. I have another call across town, near the old Millbrook estates." "Just a quick one," Ilara countered, her voice gentle, almost pleading, a silent pull she didn't fully comprehend herself. "It's freshly brewed, and you've been working hard. You deserve a moment to cool down." She gestured towards the small, sun-drenched breakfast nook by the window, where a collection of potted herbs thrived in the warm light. He hesitated again, a silent battle playing out on his young, expressive face. He glanced at the clock on the wall, a quick, almost furtive movement, then back at her, his gaze lingering, searching. The flicker in his eyes returned, a deeper, more profound curiosity this time, an unspoken question. Finally, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he gave a small nod. A surrender, perhaps, or a hesitant acceptance of the unspoken invitation. "All right, Miss Finch, just one glass then." Ilara felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, so potent it almost made her knees weak. She moved gracefully to the refrigerator, pulling out a pitcher of iced tea and two tall condensation-beaded glasses. She poured the tea, the gentle clinking of ice cubes a soothing, almost melodic sound in the quiet kitchen. She placed the glasses on the small, round oak table in the breakfast nook, next to a vase of wilting but still fragrant hydrangeas she'd picked that morning. Corbin sat down, his posture a little stiff, a little too formal, as if he wasn't quite sure how to truly relax in this elegant, yet subtly melancholic, home. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the tea, his eyes fixed on the vibrant green of the garden outside the window, avoiding her gaze. "This is good," he murmured, genuine appreciation in his voice, a simple acknowledgment that spoke volumes. Ilara sat opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a picture of quiet composure. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less awkward, less a void, and more a comfortable, shared space, filled with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant, contented chirping of summer birds. "So," Ilara began, searching for a topic, anything to keep the fragile thread of conversation alive. "You said you took over the business from your father. That must have been incredibly difficult for you at your age." Corbin nodded slowly, swirling the ice in his glass, watching the condensation bead on the glass. "It was. It really was. He was everything to me. Taught me everything I know, not just about electrical work, but about life. How to be a good man." He paused, his gaze lifting, hesitantly, to meet hers for a rare, sustained moment of direct eye contact. There was an open vulnerability in his hazel eyes that surprised her with its raw honesty. "When he passed, I thought about selling the business, just walking away from it all. But then I realized it was a part of him, a legacy. And I liked the work, helping people." He paused again, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Like you, Ms. Finch." Ilara felt a sudden, unexpected warmth spread through her chest, radiating outwards. "I appreciate it, Corbin. Truly. More than you know. It's hard keeping this old house running, especially alone. It feels too big sometimes." The words were out, a quiet confession of a deeply private struggle. She hadn't meant to say them, not so openly, but once they were out, a small imperceptible weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. He nodded slowly, a profound, immediate understanding in his eyes. There was no pity, no awkwardness, just a quiet, knowing empathy. "I know what you mean," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "My mom, she passed away when I was 16, cancer. My dad and I, we were just each other after that, a team. It was tough. Still is sometimes. You never really get over it, do you? A shared landscape of loss unfurling between them, fragile and unexpected, a common ground in the vast, bewildering terrain of grief. Ilara felt a profound sense of connection, a delicate thread of commonality weaving itself into the very fabric of their interaction, binding them in an unexpected way. She reached out almost unconsciously, instinctively, and covered his hand, which rested on the cool surface of the table, with her own. Her fingers were cool against his warm skin. It was a purely empathetic gesture, an offering of solace, devoid of any overt romantic intent, yet deeply, profoundly intimate in its vulnerability. Corbin froze. He looked down at her hand covering his, then slowly his gaze rose, heavy with unspoken emotion, to meet hers. His eyes, usually so guarded, so polite, were open now, vulnerable, raw. The silence stretched, thick and alive with unspoken emotions, the only sound the insistent, rhythmic plink, plink, plink of the faucet. His breath hitched, a faint tremor running through him, a subtle shiver that rippled down his arm. Sometimes, Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper, a ragged edge to it, her eyes locked with his, searching, pleading. It feels like you're just treading water, trying to keep everything afloat, just barely. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, slowly, with an almost agonizing deliberation, he turned his hand over, his fingers gently, tentatively, closing around hers. His touch was hesitant, almost fragile, yet imbued with a surprising, undeniable firmness. A spark, undeniable and powerful, passed between them, a current that had nothing to do with faulty wiring. It wasn't a jolt of electricity this time, but something deeper, more profound, a recognition of kinship, a mutual understanding of burden. A tremor, more intense this time, ran through Ilara, spreading through her entire being. "Yeah," Corbin breathed, his voice rough, barely audible, as if the words were torn from him. "It does. Every single day." His thumb, almost unconsciously, began to gently stroke the back of her hand, a small rhythmic motion that sent exquisite shivers, not of fear, but of profound sensation, down her arm. The simple touch was more potent than any words could be, a silent conversation unfolding between their joined hands, a narrative of shared pain and unexpected comfort. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, not with awkwardness, but with an almost unbearable tension, a palpable sense of anticipation. Ilara found herself unable to look away from his eyes. They were a whirlpool of conflicting emotions, curiosity, sadness, and something else, something primal and undeniably potent that pulled at her very core. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum beat against the silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, Corbin's gaze dropped from her eyes to her lips, and the unspoken question in the room became almost deafening, a tangible presence between them. His grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly, a silent plea, a profound dare. The moment stretched, taut and shimmering like a newly spun spiderweb, a delicate thread strung between their trembling hearts. Corbin's thumb continued its slow, hypnotic caress on her hand, a silent, unwavering declaration. His gaze, still fixed on her lips, was intense, questioning, holding her captive. Ilara felt herself trembling, a tremor that originated deep within her core, a seismic shift that rippled outwards, making her whole body hum with a profound, almost painful awareness. The rational, sensible part of her mind screamed a frantic warning. "This is impossible, Ilara. This is wrong. He's too young. You're too old, too broken." But another, deeper, more primal part, A part she hadn't known existed was silently screaming something else entirely. It was a raw, aching desire for connection, for touch, for something to finally, mercifully, break the suffocating, soul-crushing silence of her relentless solitude. She saw the profound conflict warring in his eyes, the hesitant uncertainty, the almost boyish vulnerability, yet beneath it, the undeniable magnetic pull that mirrored her own. He was so young, so open, so unburdened by the weight of years, and she so deeply scarred by her past, so entrenched in her carefully constructed world of dignified grief and quiet resignation. Yet in that suspended moment, none of it seemed to matter. Only the raw, undeniable current passing between them, a silent, powerful force. Corbin took a slow, visibly shaky breath, the sound almost lost in the stillness. His eyes, still holding hers captive in their intense gaze, moved back up to meet her own, a profound seriousness settling over his youthful features, etching lines of determination around his mouth. He swallowed hard, the slight bob of his Adam's apple a visible sign of his internal struggle. "Miss Finch," he began, his voice hoarse, a strained whisper, I really should go. I truly do have another appointment waiting. A client in the old Millbrook Estates, near the abandoned textile factory." The words were a fragile protest, a whispered, almost desperate attempt to cling to the rapidly dissolving boundaries of their professional roles, to the safe, familiar decorum of their interaction. But his hand, the one that still held hers, didn't release its tender grip. If anything, his fingers subtly tightened around hers, a silent contradiction to his spoken words, a profound reluctance to let go. Ilara's own breath caught in her throat, a sharp intake of air that burned in her lungs. The question that had been hovering, unspoken, in the living room, then in the charged atmosphere of the kitchen, finally broke free, propelled by an impulse she couldn't control, a wave of raw emotional need. She barely recognized her own voice. "Do you ever say no, Corbin?" The words were out, soft, yet cutting through the charged silence like a scalpel, exposing a raw nerve. They were not a challenge, not an accusation, but a plea, a vulnerable exposure of her own deep-seated desperation, a desperate curiosity. Did he ever truly resist the pull of human connection, or was he, like her, a slave to the unexpected currents of emotion, to the profound, aching need that transcended logic and societal norms? His eyes, already wide with a mixture of conflicting emotions, widened further, taking in the full weight of her question. A flicker of something akin to genuine shock, then a profound, almost painful understanding passed over their depths. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze dropped to their joined hands, intertwined on the cool oak table, then slowly, deliberately, back to her face. He seemed to search for something there, an answer, a silent permission, a deeper truth in the lines of her weary, hopeful face. The rhythmic plink, plink, plink of the faulty faucet suddenly seemed impossibly loud, a relentless, almost mocking punctuation to the profound stillness that held them captive. He finally released her hand, slowly, carefully, the sudden absence of his warmth, a cold shock against her skin, a sudden desolate emptiness. Ilara felt a sharp pang of disappointment, a bitter metallic taste rising in her mouth. She had pushed too far, she had bared too much. He was leaving. The fragile, potent moment, so pregnant with possibility, was gone. Corbin stood up slowly, deliberately, his movements almost wooden, as if each action required immense effort. He moved away from the table, away from her, towards his tool bag resting by the sink. Ilara remained seated, watching him, a heavy knot of disappointment tightening in her stomach, twisting painfully. She had exposed herself, laid bare a hidden, aching part of her loneliness, and he had retreated into the safety and anonymity of his professionalism, into the predictable boundaries of his job. She should have known better. He was just a young man, a handyman. She was a woman steeped in grief, older, wiser, and irrevocably broken by life. The clinking of tools against metal was the only sound for a long, agonizing minute. Corbin didn't speak a word. He just worked, his movements methodical, almost violent in their controlled intensity as he pulled out more specific plumbing tools. Ilara felt a tear well in her eye, unbidden, unwanted, a traitorous liquid betraying her carefully constructed composure. She quickly blinked it away, willing herself to be strong. Then Corbin stopped. He didn't stand up fully. He remained kneeling, his back still partially turned to her, his posture conveying a profound resignation. But he wasn't working on the faucet anymore. His hand, the one that had held hers just moments before, was now resting on the cool porcelain edge of the sink, motionless, clenched in a silent fist. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the sound ragged and raw, as if the air itself was painful to inhale. "No," he said, his voice low, raw, almost a guttural whisper, barely audible above the insistent drip of the faucet. "No, I don't. Not when it truly matters." Ilara's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged gasp. She stared at his back, unable to move, hardly daring to breathe. The words, so simple, so raw, so utterly honest, hung in the air, transforming the sterile kitchen into a crucible of profound, unspoken emotion. They were a confession, a surrender, a painful truth. Slowly, deliberately, Corbin pushed himself up, turning to face her fully. His eyes were no longer guarded, no longer uncertain, no longer polite. They were intense, vulnerable, filled with a quiet, burning resolve that pierced through her defenses. He took a single, slow step towards her, then another, closing the small distance between them. He stopped directly in front of her chair, his tall frame casting a comforting shadow over her. He didn't reach for her, didn't lean in for a kiss, didn't say another word. He simply stood there, his presence overwhelming, his gaze fixed on hers, a silent question, a profound acknowledgement of everything that had just transpired between them.